Hey everybody, it's Daisy Rain Martin, and I am here to give you 6 tips for teaching and assessing writing without losing your mind. Today I'm going to be talking specifically about narrative writing, whether that is fiction or nonfiction, real or imagined. So let's get started with tip number 1. I think every single person listening to this remembers when we were kids. We'd show up at school at the first of the year, and the first day we were given that infamous essay, 3 paragraphs. What did we do over summer vacation? We all turned in our first draft. The teacher took them all home, whipped out that red pen, and found every single mistake that any of us made and handed them back. Let's not repeat history. We need to be done with that. Here's where teachers lose their minds. Let's do some math. Let's say you have 100 students who all have a 2 to 3 page narrative essay due on Friday. Generously, you give them 15 minutes per paper to provide meaningful feedback. Well, that translates to 1,500 minutes. That translates to 25 hours. What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to take home those papers and grade for 5 hours on Friday night, another 10 hours on Saturday, and another 10 hours on Sunday? What shape are you in when you show up on Monday to teach? Now, honestly, as an English teacher, we know that there will be times for heavy lifting, like I just described. But that doesn't mean that has to be your life. You need to give yourself permission to let that go. I'm going to show you some ways in just a second, but right now, let's talk about tip number 2. When I ask my students to write a narrative, I ask them basically to give me just a snapshot of an event in their lives, something with a conflict that needs a resolution. I can't have them telling me about the best days of their life because it doesn't really follow a plot line. I had a young lady, though, that really struggled with that. She wanted a writing prompt. She would have been great with what did you do for summer vacation? I think that's what she came wanting to actually do because she's got that nailed down. I said, no, I'm not going to tell you what to write. And she got upset. And she says, well, I don't know what to write. I said, well, honey, what do you want to write about? She says, I want to write about whatever you tell me to write about. I said, Pumpkin, that won't happen. I will never tell you what to write about. I will say, we're going to write a narrative, or we're going to write something expository, or an argument, or maybe some poetry, but I will never tell you what to write about. The discussion from her side got heated. She was very upset that I wouldn't just tell her what to do. So finally I asked her, I said, what do you want? What is it that you want? She said, I want you to tell me what to write about. And I said, no, what beyond that? What do you want? And she said, a good grade? I said, no, be specific. Tell me exactly what you want. And she said, I want an A. And I said, hold on. I went over to my computer. I popped up the grade book. I went to the column for the assignment that I was just assigning. And I said, is 100 points enough? Is that good? Will that do? And she said, yeah. And so I said, 100 points, saved it, walked back and said, okay, you've got your 100 points. You've got your A. Now, what do you want to write about? I hate when grades get in the way of good education, right? I had a little guy in the back said, excuse me, could I have 100 points? I was like, no. Honestly, I think most kids embrace being able to write about what they want to write about. The fact is, every single one of us has a story to tell. There's a hashtag I love. It is hashtag own voices. As teachers, it's a beautiful thing when we can convince our kids to tell their own stories in a way that only they can tell. Stories that will resonate authentically because they are theirs. As a writer, obviously, I write books that include a wide range of diverse characters. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to try to write a story that isn't mine. It won't resonate. It won't be accurate. It won't be authentic. And as teachers, what I would really love to see is for us to amplify the voices of our students and encourage them to tell the stories that only they can tell. If you as a teacher can provide a safe place for kids to tell their stories, your classroom will be humming. Which brings us to tip number 3. As teachers, it is so important for us to have our ears to the ground, our fingers on the pulse of the writing that is being created for kids. It is our responsibility to provide exposure to a variety of diverse authors with amazing stories. There are lists upon lists of diverse writing books that have come out on the internet. I have a page on my website dedicated to authors that I love and the books that are theirs. We need to work with our librarians to seek out these texts and make them available for kids, because you know what? Kids need exemplar texts so that they can read good writing and then transfer that and be good writers and tell their stories. It is very important. It is critical that kids are able to find themselves, kids that look like they look, and stories that they just can absorb. They know that it's true, it rings true, it resonates, it's authentic. And then this is where it gets really fun, because when we put these the pen in their hands, these days it's the keyboard, but when we turn kids loose to write their own stories and they've got a good visual of what their stories could be, that's when things start getting really exciting. So here is tip number 4. At the beginning of the year, when I assign narratives, I share with my kids a story that I wrote called I May Be Dumb, but at least I can conjugate my verbs. It's a great little story for another time. But how I set it up is essentially this. I have about a page and a half. I set up the story and I label that exposition. Then I label my rising action. I get to the climax. I do the same, that big turning point in the story. I add my falling action. I label that. And then I have my resolution, which in this case is not a happy ending, but it was the new normal. I basically ask my kids to do the same thing and make sure that it is a snapshot of their lives that they are willing to share with the class, because what I do is I will pull someone's name out of a jar of popsicle sticks that I have, and I will go to my computer and pull it up on Google Classroom and display it for the class to see. Now, you might be thinking, are you crazy? I don't think so. You know why I'm not crazy? Because the whole point of that is to find that child's writing superpowers. We go through, we read it, I say, oh my gosh, that's gold. That is a sustainable idea. Look at what you did with this conversation here. You put some dialogue in here, and you really did the 2 things that dialogue is supposed to do: reveal character and push the story forward. That's magnificent. What I don't say is how their quotation marks are wrong or they spelled this word wrong. There's plenty of time for that. And it is so encouraging and it is so validating. And when that child gets all of this meaningful feedback in a way that is non-threatening, I'm telling you, they could start coming alive. And I've never had it happen to where several hands in the classroom go up right after we get done with that first person, and they beg to be next. They really do. It's kind of crazy. That part really is crazy. Let me share with you a whole plethora of writing superpowers that you can share with your kids. If you look at this grid, chances are you have several kids who have any number of these writing superpowers already, even if it's just emerging. You could really encourage your kids by saying, hey, I love the pacing that you're showing. I think that you could write some really great things. Or, you have a great hook. Wow, you're really good at that. Encouraging kids like that just makes them want to write their stories in the best way that they can, and they know that they're already on their way. It is so encouraging to them. But let's say that what you start to discover is that everybody is all over the place with different writing superpowers and different areas that they need to improve on. Let's take an example. Let's say Keisha, you've noticed in her writing how creative she is, and you know that she has solid plot lines. You know that if she would improve upon her, use of figurative language, this sensory language, that would totally make her stories pop. Well, right across from Keisha, you have Raul, who uses sensory language quite effectively, and his metaphors are beautiful, but he struggles with sentence structure. That's a really tough one. Just like it's impossible to spend 25 hours in a weekend grading papers and providing meaningful feedback to all of your writers, it's also impossible to try to wrap your head around everybody's individual superpowers for writing and all of their areas for opportunity. No human mind can do that, and you don't have to do that, which brings me to tip number 5. So, what if we created in our classrooms a culture where kids could very easily talk about their strengths and their weaknesses? Kids could be having discussions about, hey, I have that same superpower as you do, but I'm struggling with this. Oh, well, I've got that dialed in, but I struggle with this over here. So that really everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and the details are really very arbitrary. What if the kids kept track of their strengths and their weaknesses? What if kids provided that data for us and we took that data and we allowed that to inform our instruction? We have a majority of kids that are struggling with a certain area. We create workshops they can visit. However you want to handle that in your classroom, we can turn those areas of opportunity into now areas of strength and mastery. That's when things also again get really excited. That's next level stuff. But then you say, well, then how do you assess all of these different areas? Well, let me show you a rubric that might help. Okay, here is a rubric that I use to assess narrative writing. The columns are pretty straightforward. You can see that there's mastery as opposed to emerging, as opposed to not demonstrated. Likewise, the first row across, also pretty self-explanatory in terms of author's purpose and the audience and the paper making sense. I'm always going to include that in any rubric. The standards that you're teaching, that they'll change from time to time. So I've left that second row open so that you can fill in all of the information for what you want to see as far as mastery as opposed to emerging, for whatever standard you're teaching to the whole class. All right, so you can fill that in. Also, you might want to keep this in mind when the students should be able to point to the place in their paper where they've demonstrated that standard. What would be great is if you had them highlight that in, say, the color blue. So that when you get these papers, your eyeballs can go straight to the blue text and you can see very quickly whether or not they have mastered that standard according to the rubric, or they are merging, or if it's not demonstrated. Rows 3 and 4 are for students to fill out. Literally let them fill this out. Their superpower, give them that opportunity to really show off their mad skills. Have them write a description of what that would look like for mastery. Also, have them write the description for emerging and not demonstrated. And then have them maybe highlight that superpower in red. That way your eyes can go quickly to assess that in their paper, whether it's in your hot little hands in paper form, they've printed it out, or you're reading it on Google Classroom or some electronic program, whatever. For their area of improvement, have them do the same thing and just highlight that text in green. You have just made life so much easier for yourself. And you also, your students are going to be very mindful about their work. They're going to make sure that they demonstrate these skills according to the rubric because they're pointing them out to you. Now, let's talk about that last row because I, like you, am always going to have clean text on my rubric. Okay, we're going to have a full circle moment here. What we are not going to do is we are not going to be like the teachers that I had in my childhood where they took a red pen and they went through the entire paper and found every grammatical error or spelling mistake or what have you. We're not doing that. I want you to be free of that. In order to not lose your mind, you really only need 2 things in your life. One is a set of dice, and the other are some popsicle sticks. Who knew that it would just come down to those 2 things standing between you and insanity? One thing I'm always going to ask for is that every sentence makes sense. And to do that, I'm just going to roll the dice. Let's say you roll out a 5 and a 3. 8. You go down to line 8. You start at line 8 and you make sure that whatever your little piece of writing, maybe it's 10 lines, maybe it's just 6 lines. It's up to you. But you take just a little snippet of their writing, and the first thing that you are going to make sure is that every sentence makes sense. If not, then they're not going to get full credit for that. That's not mastery. As far as capitalization, punctuation, varied sentences, correct words, your run-ons and fragments, your spelling, all of that stuff, you're going to have all of those items written out on individual popsicle sticks. What you're going to do is you're just going to pick one out. Maybe it says run-ons. Maybe that's and then that's the only other thing that you are going to evaluate on in those same 8 to 10 lines, starting at number 8. You let your kiddos know that that's going to be how you're going to assess the clean text, to see how clean your text is. You're always going to make sure that their sentences make sense. But they don't know where you're going to start, and neither do you. You don't know until you roll the dice, so it tells you what line you're going to start on. You just count down and you just read a couple lines and boom, you're done with that. And then they don't know whether you're going to grade them on capitalization or spelling or the correct words. Do they have their theirs, and theirs, and their twos, and twos all squared away? Well, they don't know what you're going to grade them on, and neither do you until you pull a stick out. And that's not going to happen until they've turned their papers in. And you're sitting there with your dice and your popsicle sticks and your beverage and all of the papers that you're going to grade. And you can make a game of it. It will be fun for you. But here's the thing. If I turn in a paper and I don't know where I'm going to be graded on exactly what, but I know I have to have it all dialed in, I'm going to be really mindful. And so that, in that regard, you have just really shortened the length of time and the amount of text that you're going to spend on this, and you're not grading for every little thing. You're just grading for very specific things, and it'll be different every time. That is gold as far as that goes. There's one last tip that I really want to share with you, and I hope you take it to heart, because I think this could make all the difference as well. Tip number 6. I think it would be so fantastic if every person who taught writing to kids loved writing themselves. You could share that writing with your kids. What are your superpowers? What are your areas of improvement? We're all on this journey together. It's not like you have to be a published writer, but just write for the sheer joy of it. But if you want to be published, I have a program for you, Hamline University. In fact, I've had so many teachers tell me that they really have aspirations to write books that their kids can read. They want to write for their kids. Well, guess what? I do too. Hamline is one of the very few MFAs that is specifically geared for writing for children and young adults. It is an amazing program. If you want to contact me on my website, daisyrainmartin.com, absolutely, I'd be happy to talk about that. I'd be happy to send you the superpower grids or the rubrics, or there's also on my website that author's page that I love, and the books that they write. You can contact me on my website for any of that. Also, if your school is interested in professional development, or I even do keynote speaking, I'll tell you, I would love to hear from you. In the meantime, though, I just want everybody to hang in there. You're doing a great job, and I am so grateful for the work that you do. You are extraordinary. It is an honor. It is an honor to walk alongside you and to work alongside you. So I hope to hear from you. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope that it helps. Let me know, and keep fixing the planet, everybody.